Hey, welcome back to the next video in our series on how to pick locks. In the last video, we talked about tension and pick selection. Video before that, we talked about the different components of the lock, where we have the face, which is on the core inside of the body of the lock, the Bible, which is the top where the pins go into, the core is what rotates and what we tension. Then we have our key pins, which are inside here that interact with the key, and our driver pins are what the key pin pushes against to go up into it. They are under spring tension. One thing I did forget to mention in the last video with tension that I'll go ahead and talk about now is when selecting our tension tools, whether it's top or bottom of keyway, we want to make sure that we get one that has a good fit in the lock. So we can see that this one here at the top, I've got a lot of gap, I have a lot of play. Hold that in place. So you can see that I can turn this a good deal before the lock would even really turn. We want to use the thickest tensioner that we can fit in there to give us the most control. I'll hold that back here. There's not a lot of gap on the sides, and it doesn't move much before it is able to move the core as well. But today we're going to be talking about pin states and feedback, as well as we'll get an overview of the jiggle test because it makes the most sense to cover that now when we're talking about different pin states. So let's get this moved over and we'll start talking about it. Okay, so now that we have the cutaway position, we can take a look at the pins in their resting state. When our pick comes in to move them, we can see that they're just springy, easy to move. We only really have tension when that spring really starts to compress. Now when we go to tension the lock, this way. There we go. We'll notice that one of these two pins will be harder to push than the other. If I can get on it. Yes. And 2, it definitely gives more resistance. And 1, that's because 2 is binding. So we want to feel for the pin that gives us the most resistance. Well, I guess 1 was set. Didn't mean to set 1. Alright, so if I go and I feel 1 feels loose and springy, similar to how it did when there was no tension on the core. And then 2, I can feel the friction from where that driver pin is caught between the shear line, or caught at the shear line between the core and the Bible. So we want to feel for whichever pin gives us the most tension, and that's the one we want to push on until we get it set at the shear line. And this only having 2 pins, once 2 is set, I know 1's now binding and I can feel that resistance. We're going to slowly just add pressure to it until we get that pin set as well. Here we go. Now, other pin states that we can have within the lock. Here we go. We can have overset pins. Let's get this one overset. If I can, I might. There we go. So we've just overset the key pin in chamber 1 or stack 1. And now I have a lot of wiggle room here before I can feel anything, but when I do get on that pin, it just feels like a wall. And then when we go to set pin two doesn't feel like it's binding at all, it's loose. It gives me no resistance and no information in terms of what I feel when I push against it. Now, we can recover. It's a little bit harder the more pins you have and if they're security pins or not. But if we let off tension a little bit, see, and I just barely moved the tensioner and then everything fell. So we can go back, come here, let's get two set. Then we go to one. Now, the next pin state we can have is an underset pin. We can see that they're relatively close to the shear line, but it's not above it yet. And our key pin will have some wiggle room and be bouncy. And sometimes it just takes just a nudge to get that to break above the shear line. Other feedback that we may look at and get is we're on a pin, we get that pushed up, we move forward in the lock to the next pin, and we think we're on it, but we're not. We're actually in between the two pin stacks, pushing on warding. We're just the top of the lock. Like right now, I'm pushing up, but I'm pushing on this part in between here. The other thing that we can have, go back a little bit, is when we come in with our pick, we may think that we're on the pins, but we might actually have slipped and we're pushing here on the side. Or if we're on picking from the bottom, we may be coming up. Here we go. Switch hands here. And we might be pushing on this warding here because our pick's too thick or anything else. The other thing that can happen, like I mentioned with pick thickness, is we can rub against the warding here, trying to pick from the bottom. You can see how that's kind of a tight fit. So when I go to push on the pins, I may feel like they're binding and I'm getting friction from them, but really it's just resistance of the pick against the warding trying to fit up there between them. Now, the best thing that we can do in terms of trying to figure out if the pin is set or not set, something's overset, is the jiggle test. Now, we'll switch over to the other cutaway so we can see that a little bit better, and we'll get that explained. Okay, now that we've got the cutaway set up, we can talk about the jiggle test. Here we go. So when we come in and we find our pins, which apparently I'm bad at, we get that pin set. And what the jiggle test is we're going to come under that key pin and we're just kind of moving it and wiggling it. I get to a point to where I push up and I feel that resistance hit, but everything up until that is just jiggly, a lot of wiggle room. then in all likelihood that pin is set. Whereas before, you know, though I have this underset, I don't have a whole lot of wiggle room here. And when I go to push and apply pressure on it, I'll feel it move slightly with that friction until we get the click. Now, talked about oversetting pins. Show y'all what it looks like from this angle. Come up. There we go. And where I had the jiggle test before, I could still at least feel my pick hitting a pin, but moving it around in here, I have no resistance and nothing. Feel nothing, which tells me I probably overset that pin. Now, some locks and springs, you can just shove everything up above the shear line. You'll see that a lot with comb picking. There we go. One other pin in here. Get it? There it is. There you go. And if you can get everything above the shear line, which is what comb picks aim to do, does the same thing as setting the pins. Just a little bonus knowledge there. Yep. And you can get audio feedback from these pins as well. A set pin will typically give you an audible click when it does get set. And then if a pin falls, you're going to hear that drop as well to let you know that something is no longer set. Because when the pin drops, it's under that. Remember, our driver is under spring tension, and it's just storing energy. So if something happens to cause this driver to fall back below the shear line, that spring just unleashes all of the bound up tension and pressure it had and energy, and you're going to hear it slam into the key pin. Just if I can get that for you. Not a super loud sound, but it is a sound. And let's see if we can get the sound of its setting. So other than the physical feedback that we're feeling through the pick from the pins, either being under tension, friction because they are bound, loose because the pin's set, brick wall because it's overset, we're also listening for those audio cues to let us know what's going on. Okay, let's put everything that we've talked about together and see if we can work through this lock and get it opened. So we're going to use a 50,000th top of keyway turner. We have a 25,000th medium hook. We're going to come in here and we're going to start in the back. There we go. And I'm going to feel for a pin. It's 6. Doesn't feel like it's doing anything. Okay. Nothing there, just feels springy. And 4. See, we're pushing on the warning. We heard something fall. Now we got 3 set. 2 feels like it's not binding. 1 does not feel like it's binding. Okay, 6. 6 doesn't feel set, but it might be. Coming on down. Feeling for the next pin that's binding. That's set. That's set. Using our jiggle test. Heard some click. Yeah, that feels good. Feels good. Heard a click. And, oh, and 1. There we go. Get that set back. So next time we'll be talking about spool pins and how to deal with those within the locks. I guess like and subscribe, and we'll see you all next time.